Can Rick hear us?
Want to hear us, Rick, or not?
Rick, can you hear us?
Why don't you get started, Brian? So I'll let you kick the meeting off, please.
Okay.
The riotous crowd.
Okay. So very good. With that, call to order the meeting of the Half Moon Bay Planning Commission. Let's start. I'll ask Commissioner Damon if you lead us in the pledges of allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Very good. So just a quick announcement. Chair Rick Hernandez is joining us virtually by phone, so I will be, as vice chair, chairing the meeting. So with that, we can move into roll call. So starting with our virtual guest, Rick.
Rick, are you there?
I'm here.
Okay.
I am here.
Okay.
Commissioner Damon.
Present.
It's okay. Commissioner Benjamin,
Here.
Commissioner Evans,
Here.
and Commissioner Holt,
Here.
or Vice Chair, sorry.
Okay, with that, moving into the approval of minutes from Tuesday, April 11th, 2017.
I move that we approve the minutes dated April 11th, 2017.
Second.
I second the motion.
Here, 2 seconds. We'll go with the first one. So Commissioner Damon moved and Commissioner Evans seconded. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Okay, moving right along. We have a planning manager report, and I believe planning manager Dowdy will be providing that. Or Joe?
2 sets.
Okay.
Planning manager report tonight is
Sorry,
very, sorry?
just a second.
Yes.
Commissioner
Are you going to approve the minutes of May
Yeah,
9th?
Oh, I'm sorry.
Only
I
one
skipped right over that. Thank you
Did
very
you
much.
do-
Minutes.
Thank you very much. Yes, we do have
sorry.
we have a second set of minutes here for approval. The minutes for March 9th, 2017. Do we have a motion for those?
May 9th.
May 9th.
So it's okay, no worries.
I move approval of the May 9th minutes.
Okay. And Damon second.
All in favor?
Aye.
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 Okay, great. Thank you. So with that, now we're moving into the planning manager report.
All right, in brief, tonight we have no more updates on emergency coastal development permits. We may at your next session. 32 Jenna Lane is getting ready for you, but I don't think you will see it until July 11th at the soonest. We also wanted to note that in your packet you have a draft of the Planning Commission bylaws. We've noticed a few things that need to be tweaked, but what you could really expect from this is it will show up on an agenda for City Council on the consent calendar, and we would expect them to adopt it. If you have specific comments over the next week or two, zip an email over to me and I will check and see if your comments can be accommodated. And that's our report. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So with that, is there any questions or comments from the commissioners on either of those two items?
Through the chair, I'm assuming that if there were going to be amendments or revisions to the bylaws, as I understand it, then it would be, once they've been approved, the Planning Commission would have to come, if we wanted to make a change or a correction in the future, then as a commission, we would kind of bring that forward to ourselves, which means someone would bring it up and then we'd have to agendize it for another meeting, and then if whatever we talked about, and then eventually the city council would agree or not agree with that. Is that the process
Yes.
if there were going to be some
Yes.
amendment? Okay.
So point of information here, it seems like what we have here are Planning Commission bylaws should they be a specific item on our agenda so that if we'd like to make changes, that it can be done in a formal way as opposed to, I mean, from what I heard, you're saying, are any changes or suggestions, send it to us, but the next step in the process is going to city council. Am I correct in that?
You are, let me share with you, there's not a lot of latitude here. These are structured based on city council's own operations rules, as well as the Park and Rec Commission, which was just appointed, the Bicycle and Pedestrian Advisory Committee, and the Main Street Bridge Advisory Committee. So it's fairly formulaic, although the Planning Commission does have special responsibilities, which we've cited out of state government code and the municipal code. We're looking at just very minor things that could be changed. So if there's a big thing you're concerned about, let me know, and we'll take a look at that, and we would come back to you. But I'm really just expecting us to really only be able to be in a kind of a thin boundary of tweaking it. Yep. Okay. Okay, we can do that too. Well, you'll get the final version, of course, before we take it to council. Okay.
Thank
So
you.
Jill, through the chair, I have a couple of questions or comments.
Commissioner Hernandez, go ahead.
So, in section M, number 3, members are subject to all provisions of city policies. I'm curious as to how these are going to be communicated to us as a planning commission, just to make sure that we know what all of the city policies are. So that's just one question. We don't need to have the answer now, but it's just a question or concern to make sure that that's spelled out someplace. The other area of question, or just one, it would be helpful because we had some gasps or concerns when city council members speak at planning commission meetings. I think it would be helpful for the planning commission to understand what the protocol is when a city council member speaks at a planning commission meeting. So I'm not sure where that fits in. It's just a question because we've had some concerns about that. And then under quorum, Article 4, Section B, so there's discussion about what a quorum makes, but we had a situation happen last year where we had 3 members participating in a vote, and I initially chose to abstain from a vote for whatever reasons, but the question was, if I abstained from the vote, did that constitute a quorum for voting purposes? And so if you could, under that section, if you could just spell out, like, does the majority of a quorum constitute a majority vote? You know, if somebody abstains from a vote, how is that handled? If you could just spell that out so we're not having to go to the city attorney, I think that would be really helpful. So those are the real questions I had, and I'll turn it back over to, I have some other things I'll send in writing, but those are the principal concerns I had.
We think we know the answer to that one, but we're going to make sure. We have enough feedback that we'll just bring you a new draft next time.
Great.
Okay.
Commissioner Benjamin?
Yeah, those were good corner cases, Rick. I had just a couple of others, and I'll get them out now since it'll save me sending an email. I certainly understand abstention due to conflict of interest. Sometimes we have to abstain because we don't have the full record in front of us. And there was a policy in here that said the only reason to abstain, where was it? Basically, you had to vote unless you were abstaining for a conflict of interest. There was language like that. And there was another place where it was less so. But I can imagine reasons for abstention that are not a result of conflict of interest. I want to be sure we have space for that. Also, in the early part of the document that specifies what the duties of the planning commission are, you know, they were mostly the right kind of stuff. It made sense. When I compare it to the zoning ordinance, it certainly works, but there are other parts of the Muni Code, because things have moved around over the years. For example, the sign ordinance specifies, so that's in Municipal Code Title 14, I think. The commission is asked to play a role in that I don't see in the bylaws. It's just, you know, there's probably a more general description of our role with respect to the municipal code, and it might be easier to frame it more generally, is just the thought. I'll leave the nits for you in an email, but I wanted to get that out. Thank you.
Commissioner Evans?
Seems to me the conflict of interest requirements are pretty clearly stated here.
Oh, I'm not disagreeing with them. It's just not the only reason to exclude.
But it says all that here. It's not necessarily financial, and you just have to disclose, and it's pretty clearly spelled out right.
And I would just add, I guess, Commissioner Benjamin, I think the section you're referring to is that any vote of abstention must clearly indicate for the record the basis for the abstention, including any conflict of interest. So it doesn't necessarily limit it to any conflict of interest, but you could certainly abstain for whatever other reason you felt appropriate.
It was in Article 4C. It says, a planning commissioner shall only abstain from a vote when a commissioner has a valid conflict of interest. That was my concern.
Okay.
Thank you.
Good.
That's on page 3, Article 4, item C. Last sentence.
So we see the conflict with the voting section, yes. It's
Okay,
probably in all the
very
other bylaws. Okay.
So staff will provide a response to that. Very good. Well, thank you. Good comments. Any other comments from the commission? Okay, with that, do we have a motion to move the planning manager report? Do we have to do that? That is a good question. And I appreciate everybody's flexibility in letting me mumble through this. So with that, we can move on to public comment, and seeing no members of the public.
It might be next to Rick.
That's true. That's good. Are there any requests for public comment? No. Okay, very good. So moving on to new business and public hearings, the Capital Improvement Program fiscal year 2017 general plan conformance.
So before this item gets introduced, I have a potential conflict of interest concern, and that is because I live adjacent to the Kehoe Watercourse, and there are references in the capital improvement budget to the Kehoe Watercourse. I want to be sure, I'm happy to participate in this, but I want to get clarity on whether the exclusion from the first item in the CIP of the Seymour and the Kehoe Watercourse and the inclusion of the Seymour as the second CIP item, but the Kehoe Watercourse itself is not otherwise referenced, creates a conflict if I participate in this item.
Let me, while you're gathering your thoughts on it, first let me say what you're being asked tonight to take action on is only fiscal year 17-18 items, nothing more than that, and Kehoe is not part of the 17-18 list of projects. So first and foremost, that's an easy answer to, you're not being asked to approve anything regarding the Kehoe Watercourse. I think there's some other provisions that Stephanie can speak to with regard to the fact that you probably don't have a conflict simply because of the way the capital improvement program is kind of structured and conveying a special interest that's not to any one of you, but jump into there.
So I spoke with John about this a little bit before, and so FPPC regulations section 18702.2 provides that there can be a conflict of interest involving if the commissioner has an interest in real property, and it's where, here I can read it specifically, it's where the decision involves construction of or improvements to streets, water, sewer, storm drainage, or similar facilities, and the property in which the official has an interest will receive new or improved services that are distinguishable from improvements that are provided to other similarly situated properties. So here, there's no construction or improvements that would be different for your property versus other similarly situated properties. So I don't see a conflict of interest.
Okay, thank you both.
Trying to make it easy. Not used to seeing my head on the back of this this telecast. Not pretty, thank you. Oh, tonight. I'm in delay too. The Planning Commission is being asked to review the list of capital project proposed for fiscal year 2017-18 and to find those projects consistent with the Half Moon Bay General Plan and related plans and local coastal plan and such. So just first, a little bit of background. You know, what is a capital improvement program? Well, it's our municipal program for identifying the long-term needs for capital improvements, infrastructure, being underground, public facilities such as parks, a whole host of issues that are out and about with that. It is a financial planning document, and ultimately it is typically over a multi-year process because virtually everyone, every city, every public agency has more needs, wants, and desires from either its constituency or its infrastructure in terms of continual aging and deferred maintenance that always occurs to some extent on within municipal infrastructure, that it needs to be done over a period of time. So what's a capital improvement project in the city? And this varies from city to city and from county to county. We have, because of the relatively small nature of the city and so relatively small, although it doesn't look small when you look at the actual project numbers, have put these and pegged these at about $30,000 or higher costs. So if you've got smaller items, they're also one of the issues there is that they are permanent, as permanent as anything can be, and then generally non-recurring. So you've kind of got really three primary tests. The number one really is captured usually by the high value, 30,000 or greater, but it's really that permanent nature, non-recurring. So sometimes in other agencies you put vehicle replacements, but most of the time you don't. Mostly those are placed, for example, mowers and trucks and things in a different fundings than these, because they are obviously not permanent in any way, and they are recurring where you have to replace those things. So if you ask, you know, do we have vehicles and equipment? No, those are placed in another place. IT is a similar kind of issue in which PCs, the computers and everything are not these kinds of projects and processes, although a major server and some other things are included in here, and we'll look at that. And then the capital budget is what we're really talking about, which is the 1-year funding for the projects. So that's what state law really says. This is what the role of the Planning Commission is, to look at that and look at what's being proposed in that year for expenditure. And that, the capital budget becomes part of the annually adopted city operating budget, and has been, as of the last meeting, the council had said this is the list of projects that we want you to take to the Planning Commission. So a summary of the projects themselves is we have 10 ongoing programs and 22 individual projects
that are being actively pursued in fiscal year 2017-18, and they're distributed among 8 different kind of capital categories, and a total of fiscal year 17-18 of just under $32 million in improvements. The library itself constitutes about a third, roughly a third, a little less than a third of that, but you can see there are a lot of investments and projects out there, and I'll walk you through where those and what those are, but it's a very substantial, significant CIP for this size of city particularly, and it's a major effort. One of the things that's really was something of an evolution and perhaps a revolution over the last 2 years has been to develop these programs, and right now there are 10. There are 2 new ones that were added this year, 3 actually, 2 there and another third one, to start to look at major issues. And what we were finding in the prior years was, one, we were really looking at 1-year plan and not looking out at anything beyond the 1-year cycle for budgeting purposes. And there's a lot of reasons behind that, mainly because we had no money to expend, and then secondly, it just took a lot of time and effort to do this, and I think we were focused on other issues and efforts. One of the things we found as we picked up this CIP work a couple of years ago was that we were identifying these very individual projects which were really part of ongoing programs that we needed to deal with and fund regularly and consistently, such as our sewer collection system improvements, our ADA work, our doing the crosswalks, and down the line here, doing pavement management and replacing and repairing and reconstructing streets as we need to, or sealing those streets. So those really became part of these programs, and ultimately, as I said, this year we ended up at a total of 10. We merged a couple of projects and added 3, so it ends up at this year at 10 programs. What we have basically said to the council in this program idea is that these will be in every CIP. There will be projects and improvements proposed, most likely within every one of these annually. But as money and financials, vary and adjust over years, you will decide on how much to invest in those. So some years we may not make a huge investment in the crosswalks, for example. We are way behind in some regards. We need to do those. But in 2 or 3 or 4 years out, we may make a very minimal investment in that. And that money either won't be spent at all, or it'll be reallocated into other areas that we want to deal with, like sidewalk replacement and repair programs. So those are kind of that balancing act. Some of these programs, like the sewer maintenance program, involve restricted funds. So they're not general funds that you generate from property tax, from sales tax, from TOT, from room tax, those things. So those are very specifically only allowed to be used for those things, and so this is part of the whole budgeting program. And I would add that a number of these projects, including pavement management in particular, is a whole host of funding sources that come from that. So it's not just general fund, it's gas tax, it's other funds and everything like that. But this is sort of a foundational support to the idea that we have an ongoing effort and requirement to maintain our capital infrastructure and deal with these. And so the program-wise, there's storm drain, there's facility programs that are dealing with sidewalk repair replacement, very self-explanatory. One of the, a couple of the, well, these are 3 very new programs actually in here that are out there, and I'll mention those briefly. One, the city does not currently have a valid ADA transition plan, which we're required by law to have, which basically says this is how we're going to plan for making sure all of our facilities are ADA, Americans with Disabilities Act compliant. We did some work a number of years ago, but this is out of date and we need to bring that up to speed. So in this fiscal year, we're looking at doing the transition plan, This program involves implementation of what that plan says we should be doing and prioritizing over the next 5 years. So that's kind of how that goes. This is a unique one in which the council at their retreat recognized that last year during the rainy season we had a number of projects and things that we had to respond to and react to and deal with in terms of erosion issues, for example, storm related issues that may not be erosion but may be other issues and circumstances. And what they agreed to do was to set aside a specific program that said we're going to allocate $250,000 over the next 5 years as a safety point that says if we have an issue or with it, we can go to that funding source and we can fund and deal with those projects and programs and to deal with this as quickly as we possibly can, and then come back to council if need be for additional monies and funding and deal with that. Any of these actions would take at least the city manager, and oftentimes will take city council approval to enter into contracts or such, but it allows us to have a place to go and deal with these and respond to these emergency responses. And if we don't have those situations, that money will roll back into the general fund. So it's not a spend it or lose it situation. It's either if we have an issue and we need it, we'll have it. If not, it'll go back into the general fund reserve and be available for another time and another need and catastrophe as it may be. The sewer programs is a huge effort dealing with that. The sewer main repair, you can see over the life of this, is a pretty significant investment. This is a huge one and probably going to be higher than that. In reality, we're working through some of the numbers, but that is a huge issue of replacing the force main that serves Ocean Colony, the majority of Ocean Colony, the Ritz-Carlton, and also redoing and restoring the entire lift station and pump system and everything there. So it's a big issue. Street programs, we have many needs, and we are trying to maintain our pavement condition index number at retaining at least at 65 or improving that, which is a major bump up from years past in which we had an index of about 55, which really is really in failure point. So we've done a lot of work, but this requires a continuing effort to deal with that. So that's kind of the program side of the equation. And then you get to what you have in your packet, which are the 22 individual projects that are really very specific to their issues and needs and efforts there. And again, those are broken out into different categories of work. What you'll note is at this point, if you're asking what's going on with the park side, why don't we have capital improvements in there? Basically, the Parks Master Plan is a critical piece for us to do that master planning work, have the community weigh into that, Planning Commission, City Council, and what we're looking at is in the following fiscal year to be identifying the potential projects and improvements that are being driven by this Parks Master Plan. And I would say in some regards, the trails is also driven in part by the Ped Bicycle Master Plan that's also going through, although what we have here are some real kind of concerns and issues about, one, erosion and loss of the trail and things along Poplar Beach area there. We also have issues in which we have potential hazards, trip and fall issues and concerns that we really need to deal with on the trails, and so we really can't wait around to wait for those things. So on the drainage projects, these are both significant challenges and issues. The Seymour Ditch erosion stuff repair is somewhat of a spitball in terms of the amount. This is right now, we're not sure. We're going to be coming back to City Council on June 20th to talk about potential short-term and longer-term improvements and costs associated with those order of magnitude costs, shall we say, and these conceptual kind of costs. And then we have this project here, which is the county repairing the street that fell in 2 years ago here. And we have along this area here a piece of the arroyo that is also failing. This project in general is being challenged right now by changes at the Coastal Commission with regard to soil of sand replacement and sort of mitigation issues that may place these projects out of the realm of affordability for us to deal with, and we're going to have to make some very difficult decisions down the road. And the Coastal Commission is going to have to make some very difficult decisions. We understand that balancing issue with dealing with the sand, but I have to say, now may not be the time to be dealing with that. But and the question about how public improvements and what we're going to do to protect public improvements and roads and highways and things of that nature is a big issue. Not going to be dealt with by you or I at this point. It's going to be dealt with by other people, but it's a challenge. From economic development kind of captures a number of things. You can see here we have the general plan and local coastal program update. This budget looks a little funky here, but it's because there are other funds. There's other things. There's funding that are carrying over from prior years. And I'll mention it because we might as well just mention it. June 6th, the council will be considering whether to accept the resignation of Diet and Bhatia, our general plan consultant team, with that. So we'll be taking that up on June 6th for conversation and discussion with that. And so this is being built around the concept that we will be taking this more of an in-house approach to this. After the June 6th meeting, we'll come back to your meeting and the next meeting and talk to you about what that means and kind of where that goes with it. One of the things we're excited about is the vehicle charging stations. We're looking at putting one at the Adcock. We're looking at putting one at the new library. And we're looking at putting one in downtown. And we're in process with a grant funding for that and some other funds and to put together these things. As I said, there are some unique and operational improvements kind of issues that do involve a large amount of money and a large sum of project. The financial software, the enterprise resource planning is a very significant budget. We're right now in process of reviewing the proposals that we received. And then tied to that is really is our permit system asset management software. We currently basically borrow software from our consultant firm CSG, and we do not own it. We do not have any control of it, and ultimately we will get the information, the data from that, but we will not have any software if in event CSG or the city decides to transition to another party or in-house of that nature. So it's not a very good plan right now. So we're looking to provide some control over that and take ownership of that and to be able to move forward for those issues. Mentioned the Parks Master Plan, that's moving forward. Facility projects are out there. As you, this is probably the one I'll point to, which I think is one of the most important ones, and it's one of the smaller amounts of money. We're, along with the ADA transition plan, we're looking at doing a facilities asset and maintenance assessment. So we're going to bring firm in or an individual to come in, take a look at our facilities, this building, the Adcock building, City Hall, other mainly structures and facilities, to look at what our deferred maintenance is, what our issues are, what problems, what code issues we may have, and to put together basically a preventive maintenance program so we can begin to look at what we need to look forward to in terms of large cost items and smaller cost items, and how we can be better at preventive maintenance and cost the community and the public dollars less by being proactive in terms of looking at maintaining our structures and buildings. So that's something that we basically put on the shelf many years ago as we were dealing with financial challenges and issues. And it's something we believe is critical to moving it forward. Street projects, no surprises here. We did receive the award of funds at this point down the road for the Main Street Bridge. We, with our staff, put together a grant and received over $1.2 million toward the Complete Streets project for for Poplar. I'm very proud of that. That was something that we were struggling with, whether we had the capacity to put the application in to begin with, but as a result of that hard work from staff and the very fast turnaround time, they were able to put that together. We have some issues with the collapsing drainage, storm drain along Main Streets. We need to do some significant repair of that storm drain area, and then we have the infamous Highway 1 safety projects north and south that are moving forward, but relatively at a pace that the council is comfortable with. Trail projects include a number of improvements, trying to improve this trail particularly, and we right now here at Miramontes Point, you can see where we're having settlement, and the concrete is cracked all along there, and we're differentiating, creating the potential tripping hazard, and we also have this kind of mess here that needs to be repaired and dealt with, and with the porta potties there at the Miramontes Point. The one that we're very excited about, well, I mean, these are all really good ones for the community. Obviously, the bike ped master plan is a big one that you guys will be involved in as the city, as the planning commission. But these two are pretty interesting. One is looking at it's starting to design a vertical access at Poplar Beach. We did some maintenance work, but looking at a somewhat permanent fix into that access and trying to get safer access down from the parking lot area. And I think more critically is this idea that the council just considered last week at their meeting, is really taking a new look at Poplar Beach in terms of really creating a there and there. And one of the things that drives Jill crazy is the dumpsters that you see from, as you come at Railroad Avenue, and what's your view shed? Well, you get to see the ocean in the distance here, and before that you see 2 trash dumpsters parked out in the street. So those are being moved into the dumpster, the trash enclosure that exists there, and we're moving some things around. So we're looking at some short-term improvements here to deal with things. We're also looking at sort of a 5-year plan to try to protect and maintain the existing trail in its current alignment, looking out 5 years plus to looking at the realignment and moving inland the trail, and then also looking at whether the current parking lot makes sense in its current location configuration, given now we have a trolley that's operating, dropping people off, picking people up. We have issues that in terms of how that parking, we have equestrian parking issues and equestrian access issues we need to work through. So this one is a really exciting project, and then part of that becomes the issue of doing temporary erosion control to protect the current trail and not have it washing into the ocean. And if you didn't catch the NCE report, which I think should be going up on our website, it's an important one, but to basically put it this way, we started studying the coastal trail from Poplar to Kelly with concerns mainly about erosion coming from the ocean side, sea level rise and ocean erosion. What we ended up with was a study that said you got a bigger problem than the ocean side. The localized storm water that's coming from both the neighborhoods that are flowing into it, 4 different locations, pipes that are there, as well as the compaction and all of the human use and abuse of the bluff top are resulting in 2.5 times the rate of erosion that the ocean is actually causing and working away. So we're actually basically working erosion from both sides, the ocean side and the inland side, and if we don't do something, our bluff top is going to be gone sooner than it should be, frankly, and everything like that. So part of this is about management of that bluff top area and starting to direct people a little more toward the trail itself and off the bluff, looking at where we put our benches and also reevaluating potentially, I think, the whole memorial bench program and a whole host of issues. Longer term, but that's what's out there in the mix for that. So, again, we're asking the Planning Commission to find the 17-18 capital projects consistent with the Half Moon Bay General Plan, and I missed the Planning Commission on that, so thank you. Questions?
Thank you very much. With that, any questions from the commissioners? So we're Commissioner DeMond.
Thank you. Nice report. Appreciate you going over these. Just from a conceptual standpoint, excuse me, been asked questions from other people on this report. Is this, in effect, a lot of this seems maintenance as well as capital. So are these totals, in effect, the total amount that the city anticipates spending for both capital improvements per se and for maintenance on sidewalks, roads, and so on? So this is the total number.
Capital improvement program includes both new capital infrastructure, capital facilities, as well as major capital repairs, maintenance. So yes, this is a total package.
Okay, so is there a, quote, maintenance budget that's not included in this?
Yes.
There is, okay,
Within the operating budget is the maintenance budget.
okay.
And the maintenance budget covers the normal day-to-day work of mowing, weeding, the striping of restriping of some areas, putting the red curb paint. Some of those are done by existing staff, some are done by contract. So those are covered in the operating budget.
I appreciate that distinction, thank you.
Okay, moving on, Commissioner Benjamin.
Yes, so a couple of questions. First, with respect to drainage, I see the item is listed as Storm Drainage Master Plan Implementation, and of course we've had a Phase 1 Storm Drainage Master Plan process, and there's a recommendation for a contract for a Phase 2. Is this Phase 1 and Phase 2, or is this going to be Phase 2? How does this relate to that phasing?
So Phase 2 is almost at the point of being complete. It was funded in fiscal year 16-17. It's been under preparation and will be presented to the council right after the, sometime after the first of the year. So there are, what we anticipate out of that, one is that we're way overloaded with projects and work, but those will be integrated into fiscal year 18-19 capital improvement program over the 5-year period of whatever we can deal with.
Okay, so I really appreciate the fact that you've excluded Kehoe, because that means I can talk about this.
Yeah.
So thank you for your consideration. In 2013, the city obtained a coastal development permit for a citywide storm drainage management plan that excluded several water courses in the town. One of them was the Roosevelt water course.
Mm-hmm.
Does the storm drainage master plan implementation here include Roosevelt or not?
At this point, it does not contemplate that work specific. What I can say is that we have added within the draft of the operational budget some additional funding for biotic study and work, which was contemplated to include work on potentially Roosevelt Ditch, starting to look at Roosevelt Ditch, because we're going to have to do that work in advance of modifying the streambed alteration agreement with the CDFW, as well as going with the CDP.
So you can see where I'm headed with these questions,
Absolutely.
right?
The other thing that we're potentially looking at for that money in the operating budget is to do biotic study and analysis over next to Bev Cunha Country Road in advance of some of that work there, the ESHA analysis and study. So we're looking at some of those out of there. And clearly, Roosevelt, if I recall, in the Phase 1, Roosevelt was definitely shown as an area with one of the most problematic, at least nuisance flooding and issues with work that needs to be done. So I'm kind of looking at that.
Yeah, I mean, the reason that I'm asking these questions, just for my colleagues, is that if we're being asked to find the capital improvement program consistent, but it requires a coastal development permit, if there's work specified in the plan for which a coastal development permit has not been obtained or isn't being contemplated, that would be problematic. But I'm going to trust that the way the program will be phrased will unequivocally require coastal development permits for work in these kinds of areas.
If they are in riparian, if they are in the buffer areas, it's a no-brainer
Okay, thank you.
out there.
Also, there, of course, in a capital improvement budget, it's not unusual when we're making decisions on capital budgets to employ capital expansion algorithms. So there's a problem in industrial engineering called the capacity expansion problem. When you make an economic decision to increase the capacity of something, for example, the number of electric vehicles or the number of parking spaces in a city parking area or something hypothetically like that. And as you know, the our local coastal program requires us to ensure that we do not make growth-inducing projects. We're required to consider the project as needing to be consistent with our target projections for growth. And of course, that's been modified by Measure A and then again by Measure D. And I wonder if any of the projects in the 32 that are described here, in your mind, would have, with the possible exception of the library, which is clearly an expansion, that has also been subject to coastal development permits. Are there any that are that you would see as capacity expansion?
For the most part, no. I'll caveat that. Within the sewer, for example, and the reason why I say that, within the sewer program itself, there are capacity improvements that have been identified within the adopted, approved sewer master plan. Those capacity improvements are necessary to meet current needs as well as planned for needs within the scope and realm of Measure D and all the other provisions in the water limits and all of those things. So from that perspective, yes, there is contemplated down the road capacity improvements, expanding and increasing the size of the pipe in various areas, because we have problems, particularly during wet weather events. And we had those issues on Kelly Avenue, for example, where we have I&I. We have the stormwater getting into those pipes and addressing those things during a few of the height of the storms, where we normally have 6.5 at most million gallons of water being treated. We were upwards, from our side of the ledger, we were at 11 or 12 during the height of that, going through the sewer plant. So there's some issues there, but all of those things cause some problems and issues, and I'd rather get them to the plant than to have them pop up out of manholes and things without the capacity. We also need to look at I&I issues, but there are some absolute needs and issues where those are out there. Again, those are the outliers. The vast majority, if not, the absolute, all of these are addressing issues and needs, such as what Sam is now dealing with is 4 or 5 now significant ruptures and leaks of the IPS line that serves El Granada and Montara, that are creating an environmental mess out there.
Right.
And so those are the types of things that we're trying to do in a preventive way.
Okay.
So this capital improvement program is for the most part about preventive or addressing current needs and issues and problems, not.
I mean, the concern you raised about I&I is a great example of something that sort of could be treated, we can certainly consider that as addressing an immediate, being consistent with addressing an immediate environmental hazard that has nothing to do with growth inducing. On the other hand, at some point in the future, an administrator could look and say, oh, we've got plenty of capacity, let's go. So, I think with proper controls, it's possible to overcome those concerns, but it needs to be programmed
And
in a way that addresses.
I think we have to be careful at times about not getting too in the weeds too much on this. I mean, for example, we're going to be looking at a new trail, having to move it inland between Poplar and Kelly. That trail could be an asphalt section, it could be 2 5-foot DG sections, and it could have the equestrian. And well, that DG sections are more than what the current trail has the capacity to deal with. I mean, you can cut that in many and dice it and slice it any many ways you deal with it.
Drainage
I know
and
that's not
sewer-
what you're getting at.
Drainage and sewer are big infrastructure items. I'm not
The
worried about the
drainage
trails.
the drainage again is not trying, the drainage, no one in their right mind tries to overbuild their drainage infrastructure, and particularly underground infrastructure, which is extremely cost prohibitive anyway.
Thank you for the question answers.
Additional questions, Commissioner Evans?
Sorry, John, I just, in my packet, there isn't the larger printout of the 10 projects and the 22 projects. There's just the one of the 32 projects.
So the
This is little
32,
tiny
the one
things.
you have includes the 10 programs.
So
That's why you have 32. I just broke them out into 2 distinct areas.
So I assume, because the amounts of money are different, that the arithmetic actually works, and that what the totals are on our 32 projects is correct with these
Well,
other graphics.
the good news is that you're not responsible for the money side of it. The good news is that, or the bad news, or the news is that this has been a fluctuating number until we finally sort of resolve some of the issues. Even today, we received a notice that we got a few $1,000s more on the Poplar Beach Trail, which is a great news, but we balanced this all out with the budget, and now we got $9,000 to have to add in at some point. So it's been a bit of a fluctuating point. But what you see here is, and the key kind of for this at this point is the 25 million, which is the project number, and then you take, go backwards, and then you go back to the programs, and that's the 5,411,000, which roughly equates to the total that we talked about there of the 31,870,646. But again, this is a bit of a moving number, but it's darn close at this point.
Right, and then there's a couple of items, like the city parking lot reconstruction and things like Main Street Bridge. I'm assuming, or should I assume that there's going to be coordination of that with downtown specific plan, master plan studies of how everything's working in around the core part of the town? Or are these parking lot reconstructions already resolved projects?
They're
that are-
already resolved and designed projects.
And we don't, as a planning commission, we don't see any of that, and why is that?
Because they're replacement of existing infrastructure in the same form, same place, same size, same
This is
everything.
fixing up what's already there.
This is fixing what's there.
Okay.
Now, one of the things we've tried to do, and the reason is to at least tie in the parking lot reconstruction with the street repaving project, so we could perhaps get economy of scale in cost of material and mobilization and all the factors that go into cost. So, trying to cut some cost.
Thank you.
Very good, thank you. So I'll ask if Commissioner Hernandez has any questions.
Commissioner Hernandez does have questions, and he texted them to me, so it'd be a little bit easier and cleaner to read. So I'm going to read each one, and maybe John can answer them. The first one is, the dumpsters and the view drive him crazy as well, so kudos for paying attention to that. The next one is, what are we doing to coordinate street repairs and maintenance with utilities and other agencies? For example, the city replaced Poplar last year. PG&E just ripped up the street, and it would have been great opportunity to have underground utilities.
Okay. Well, we resealed Poplar. I believe we didn't do a full reconstruction, but we did do some major repair of it, and it would have been nice to know that PG&E was going to be doing this major work. So what are we doing? We're, in conjunction with the capital improvement program, we are meeting with and working with the utility providers, CCWD, PG&E, all the folks to coordinate the capital projects, bring them in, and to ensure that if they've got major improvements they need to make, that they make those improvements in advance of us going in and doing street reconstruction, for example. Poplar is an unfortunate situation, although today they were out doing the resurfacing, so hopefully it'll be better when you come home from that perspective. But that's where we have to be, and with the Ventura and Washington Boulevard work, we spoke to CCWD, for example, and they expedited some replacement of their mains, their water mains that they had planned for several years out, and brought those into alignment with our major reconstruction project of those streets so they could go in and deal with it, because we told them they weren't going to be popping open our streets in 2 or 3 years. Now's the time to do that, and they were very cooperative and understood that, and so that's pretty commonplace in dealing with those issues. So that's what we're doing now to coordinate.
Okay, the next question is, what are we doing about the Ocean Colony Ritz-Carlton improvements to the access, sorry, another message, an access trail required under their settlement with the Coastal Commission and the city? If the requirement to provide funding will expire in a year, we should have it in our budget.
Well, the issue between the Ritz is between the Ritz and the Coastal Commission, frankly, and I'd rather keep it there. And I assure you in the community that the Coastal Commission, and Jill and I were just up for our regular coordination meeting with them, have not forgotten about it and will not allow that to expire out. The issue, I think, that's really at hand is that Coastside Land Trust is working on their proposal and package for the CDP for extending the coastal trail north to Redondo Beach Road. And part of that is an acknowledgement that probably putting that access point and using the money from that project is appropriate somewhere in that vicinity of that work. It is never going to happen at the end of Redondo Beach Road. It's just not going to happen there. The geology and the realities of that height and that problems there. And I don't say never because I'm not supposed to say never, but that one I'm pretty confident about. So that's really where we are. We're with it. We're on it. Having said that, one of the questions is, should we take that money and use it at Poplar Beach, for example? Coastal Commission has said to us, absolutely not. They want something close to that point. They will not accept it being used at Poplar because it already exists and you're already planning to do something. You have been planning to do something, but the access exists. They want a new access point. So they've made it clear to us just last week that that was never going to play in their book. Now, again, never say never, but at this point, that's where we are. The council did receive, or the city received over almost $400,000 in payment of the last installment for parks fees from Carnoustie project. And that money was set aside into the Parks Fund, which provides a very nice funding source if the council wants to go there and deal with that, to be used for Poplar Beach access, including the vertical access. So there is a fairly significant chunk of money that wasn't there just last year with Carnoustie project filing and funding that. So that's kind of where we are and where we see it, and it's never been something that the city has been directly involved in, because it was about a coastal commission enforcement action, and they, in our estimation, are doing a wonderful job holding their feet to the fire and moving forward with them, and it's really not our business until someone decides where they want to put it, and then it'll be potentially our business.
So a follow-up from the last question, how do we, okay, never mind. I think that is it from Commissioner Hernandez, and he expresses his gratitude for your diligence.
Thank you, Commissioner Hernandez via Bridget.
I mean, he can speak right now if he has any other questions or comments.
Yeah, Commissioner Hernandez, you want to follow up at all on any of that? Hearing nothing. So I'll move on. I just want to third my appreciation for addressing the Poplar Beach dumpsters and that sort of view. I'm a real fan of capital improvement projects that actually address a larger maintenance issue, and I think the Poplar Beach dumpsters and just the beautification there, it really gets at, you know, if as visitors are coming to our beach, if they don't think that the city cares about the beach, they're not going to care about it either. So so really doing that beautification project, I think, will actually ease a number of cleanup and maintenance issues down there.
One of the things I'm excited about is we have ordered new concrete receptacles that have both recycling and garbage. So we'll be placing those out there as well, because there's never been a clear place and identified area for recycling, and that was something that Council Member Eisen and the council supported, and so we moved forward with doing some of that work as well. And we're also looking at some things that other places are doing, which include potentially providing trash bags, the appropriate kind, for people to go down and take to the beach with them and bring their garbage back up from the beach, to try to encourage better behavior on their part, and to deal with some of these issues that make it easy and make it virtually impossible for people to not recognize that they have a role in it.
Yeah, I think that's exactly the right approach, is creating some level of social responsibility there. And to the extent there can be some messaging and interpretation, just even a pack your trash sign, something like that.
We have placed our proposal into the Cal Recycle for the beverage funds to fund some receptacles, as well as signage, educational signage, and signage about pack your trash and do exactly what you're talking about. So that'll be coming along with this as well. So we get $5,000 annually from that fund, at least at this point. That's what we roughly get. So we're going to be devoting that money this year, per the council's direction, to Poplar.
Very good. Regarding the electrical vehicle charging stations, to what extent are we tracking the existing use of those existing stations, and sort of, you know, monitoring how they're used, and how do we cite new locations? How do we make that decision?
Well, our one facility is a charge point facility, one of the main players in the business. We have access to all of the information, so we can run reports. We run reports at times to look at what's going on. We can look at the times of usage. We were actually talking about that in the office today, about if we looked at putting an additional one charging station in downtown, you know, how would we work that? Would we look at allowing overnight? Would we look at a longer charging times in the evening hours, so it's not competing against the folks during the day, folks that's maybe staying at the Half Moon Bay Inn or something and want an overnight charge. So those are things we need to look at and deal with. What I can say is that the usage of that existing charge point is pretty extensive, and be happy to provide some information. But we're not worried about the usage at the Main Street. We think that the library itself is a logical place, particularly because it's a zero net energy facility, and The reason why it wasn't in the initial work out there in terms of concept was that we weren't sure whether it would work with the zero net energy, but what we've been assured now, the engineers, the electrical engineers have looked at it, and we can definitely accommodate and not lose our zero net energy perspective on that.
So the charging station that's located at New Leaf, that is not,
Private,
it's private,
purely
okay,
private.
okay.
So, and eventually, we would really like to take a look at the fast charge as well. And then there's also, I believe, at the Ritz, there is a Tesla charging station in the parking garage there.
Okay. So, and I'm sure, particularly Commissioner Benjamin here, but I'm sure there's others who have more information on this. But I'm just, in terms of the storm drainage along the bluff tops in particular, you know, I live on Myrtle Avenue and sort of walk down that trail there quite a bit, really channelized stormwater. And I just, you know, I've always envisioned that. It just seems like a really great restoration potential to, you know, create some habitat there that could really slow that flow and capture some of that in a way that actually, you know, results in some habitat restoration. I know there's, you know, certainly land ownership issues all over the bluff tops there. So to what extent are we, you know, looking at that sort of the more natural infrastructure type of approach on some of those things versus the sort of channelize and dump type of stormwater?
Well, obviously, statutorily, we're obligated to be looking and implementing green infrastructure. So everything that we now look at, and particularly from a stormwater perspective, we have to be contemplating the green infrastructure concepts and treatment and all those things. What I will say is this, is that I think on the short term, we need to stabilize those areas and do some temporary piping and backfilling and stabilizing those areas, followed with restoration and revegetation on the bluff top and controlling of access. That's sort of the first step. I think as we look at relocating the trail and we start looking inland and we start creating this idea of more of the meadow to the bluff top area, I think we can really then envision a better and more green kind of concept of a natural path to that point, and leaving, for the most part, the bluff that we now know as our trail to go back to as natural as it possibly can and protect that, with the exception of, we think, some spurs that come out and let you take a look at the bluff and the ocean, but really focusing the emphasis 100 to 150 feet inland to give us to at least 2050 based on most assumptions to that. So I think we're really looking at multiple phase kind of deal with that, but in the initial, we really need to stabilize what we've got and really do some temporary work, which will not be exactly what we'd all like to see, but it's probably just an absolute necessity, or we have these things chasing so far back. And Jimmy was at the council meeting, I think, when we talked about that, and he had some nice points to make on that. But we're going to be chasing these draws back hundreds of feet if we don't watch. It'll be the next Seymour ditch. The Myrtle bubble and the Myrtle point there will be the next Seymour ditch if we're not careful, and we don't want that and need to deal with that. So we need to sort of stabilize, stop that, and then figure out what the bigger picture for restoration and really naturally dealing with those issues is.
Commissioner Benjamin.
So just, yeah, through the chair, thanks for the thought. As I recall, the 2013 citywide storm drainage maintenance coastal development permit allows for the kind of work that you're describing as sort of first aid, stop the bleeding kind of project, as well as the restoration and maintenance. And in fact, the local coastal program requires that when a project comes up that it's wholly or partially feasible to do restoration, that the planning director has the authority to call for that in these permits. So
the issue we have on the Poplar is, as far as I can tell in terms of the read to that, is basically it went to the fence line of that area and didn't extend west of the fence line that basically is the equestrian trail line. So that area has been left to no man's land in terms of the stream bed alteration agreement. and it also fell into coastal commission potential jurisdictional area.
Thank you for the clarification. So in the area that is east of the coastal trail, as I recall, the coastal development permit and the streambed alteration agreement provides the authority to do these kind of
Yes.
restorations and the first aid. West of the trail, the city is not in possession of a coastal development permit to do this work.
Correct.
Which reinforces the concern I raised earlier that any of these projects would be compatible, would be consistent with the local coastal program with the very clear proviso that we're going to get the coastal development permits before we do
Absolutely.
work there.
Absolutely. And when we went to our coordination meeting, we spoke to staff about these projects. We explained what we were looking at and what's going to be coming down the line, and asked for their help in terms of defining what is and what isn't armoring, for example, and what is and what isn't feasible in terms of what they see as a permitting, because we're going to have joint jurisdiction on some of this. We're going to have ours above and theirs on the bluff, and so it's going to be this fun work, which I guess the good news is that we can merge into only their permit if we want to, theoretically.
I think
because
it's
it doesn't
great.
involve an emergency permit.
This is going to be a great learning experience for us.
Oh, absolutely, but
I
you
mean
know.
that in all sincerity. I don't mean
Yeah, no, I agree with you. This is it's extremely interesting for me, and I think my staff is interested in it from a purely sort of on the cutting edge of the issues there. But beyond that, it's critically important to the community. This is a huge asset that we need to preserve and protect and enhance to the extent we can.
Commissioner Hernandez just wanted to mention that he encourages the city to look into solar-powered trash compactors.
Okay.
Comment.
Very good. Thank you, Commissioner Hernandez. Just following up on that, I think, as we're looking at the stormwater management, coastal erosion, all this sort of stuff, just, keeping the long-term mind frame and not going from the emergency permit to the emergency permit. And I think there's really a potential for a win-win where we can accommodate stormwater, public access, and habitat improvements along those bluff tops, and something that I think would be a real asset to not only Half Moon Bay, but just the whole region.
And I will say this project here contemplates master planning and doing a master environmental document to look at these things and deal with it in a master CDP, and hopefully be able to capture these types of projects and issues in a more comprehensive way and clearly, rather than a case-by-case basis and emergency-to-emergency basis. So that is our intention, is to try to consolidate as much as possible and do it comprehensively.
Yeah. Well, great, because unfortunately, I don't think the problem's necessarily going away. So with that,
problem's not going away.
that concludes my comment. Commissioner Benjamin?
No, I just was wondering if you were interested in a motion.
I wanted to hear from Jill first.
I have a related topic that is in the public interest that I failed to mention in the planning manager's report. Hearing over and over again about the bluff erosion. June 3rd, the city, along with San Mateo County, will pitch a tent up by the Poplar Beach parking lot and participate in a Shrinking Shores project. It's a very simple, but we expect impactful presentation for the community to see. There'll be a couple signs on the beach representing 2050 and 2100 sea levels, and we're, in our case, going to do our own additional signage up on the bluff representing 2050 and 2100 bluff edge. And we'll be there from 10 till 1. We will have a lovely coffee and all kinds of other materials, and we think we will engage a lot of folks. So if you swing by, we'd love to see you. If you could promote it, we think this is the kind of thing that frankly, the professionals in this field have been struggling to explain this to people. The maps don't mean enough, and this should. So thank you for letting me.
Great. Thank
Pop
you.
that
So
back in.
I think, really important to incorporate this into something as fundamental as a CIP program. So I'm glad to see that's done. So with that, I'm happy to entertain a motion.
So, thank you. Before I make a motion, this is a public hearing item, and although the public isn't present, I'm thinking as a matter of procedure, you
Thank
probably
you.
need
Thank
to
you very
open and
much,
close the
Commissioner
public
Benjamin.
hearing.
Yeah, so with that, open the public hearing. If there's any members of the public who wish to comment. Seeing none, we'll close the public hearing. And with that, happy to entertain a motion.
I move to approve the resolution next in order.
Do I hear a second?
Second.
With that, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you very much. So moving on to our next item, the study session, Local Coastal Program, LC LUP.
Here we are. We're on the threshold of the Planning Commission engaging on delivering the local coastal land use plan. And do we need to dock the lights down a teeny bit? I think that would help. Thank you. We have a brief presentation tonight. This is really very specific follow-up from your retreat. And our goal for the evening is to walk out of the room with a real clear understanding of your work plan and what the commitment is involved with that. And also understanding that we are flexible and feedback along the way will be very helpful if we need to make adjustments. But we really do want to set this course up. So our agenda tonight, we will cover the following. We're going to set up a little bit on context and resources, which we've included some of that in your packet. Acknowledge what's going on with the community input, where the GPAC ended, the proposed work plan, that's where we'll spend the most time, and the Planning Commission's decisions about your approach. So with respect to context and resources, we note what you have from the city perspective. You have the 1993 Local Coastal Land Use Plan. You have the first public draft Local Coastal Land Use Plan, and we will be providing amendments to it. It will look like an underlined strike-through document that will capture most of the GPAC input. It's pending, and we plan to give that to you one piece at a time. We can't process it all at once. You also, though, already have the policy comparison table that includes the 1993 policies and how they were presented in this first public draft. Now, outside of the city context, where are we getting our guidance? Well, this is born out of the Coastal Act. This is the city's commitment to implementing the California Coastal Act. We talked to Coastal Commission staff, and I've been just experimenting myself with what seems to be most helpful, which is why we sent in your packet the Coastal Commission's Local Coastal Program Update Guidance. It's that fairly large document that I sent you an email about saying don't read it all yet. We'll get there. And we're also going to take a little peek at the Malibu Local Coastal Land Use Plan, and we'll talk about a little bit about why that is, but not dig too deeply into it. We're going to try to keep that on a level that's really pertinent to Half Moon Bay, at least from our perspective. So that was the lay of the land, and this document you got from the Coastal Commission, that's part one. It's focused on the policy of your local coastal program. They have a part two. The part two addresses your zoning. We're not going to do that yet. So we thought you had enough to put in the binder. What our intention will be, and you're going to see in the work plan segmented by topic, is we will make suggestions for what you read in the guidance document in advance of each of your sessions, and try to give as much context there as possible. Also note there's a section that the sea level rise guidance piece is now a separate document. It's not in their guidance document. It's about 4 times thicker than the document we sent you, so we're not going to produce that for you. We can talk more about this later, but I want to reassure you about a couple things. First of all, the city did prepare a sea level rise vulnerability assessment. That document in a draft form was reviewed by Coastal Commission staff and Ocean Protection Council staff. They gave us plenty of feedback, and it was all incorporated into that document. The document includes constructs for policy guidance that are in conformance with the Coastal Commission's sea level rise guidance document. And in fact, that policy guidance was part of how we were able to craft policies in your first public draft local coastal land use plan. So this bit of the rigor, to some extent, has been completed. I'm sure there's more to be done, but there was a real college try on that one. Okay, so why Malibu? Well, the Coastal Commission really likes it, and we think they probably wrote it, but they really like it. So it's accepted by them. And in fact, we were even looking at some of the policies in the Malibu plan in guiding, updating for the first public draft Half Moon Bay local coastal land use plan. One thing about it, got to get my prop. All right. So this is it, and it has it's from actually 2002. It has really thoughtfully framed and well developed policy sections, one after the other, sequencing right through what the Coastal Act demands these policy documents to do. So it does the job. That said, it is not their land use plan. Malibu has a separate land use element, and Half Moon Bay does not. We look at the City of Half Moon Bay's local coastal land use plan as also the city's land use element, and this is kind of a big deal in terms of the context of how these documents are written and the scope of them. So we just wanted to note that a little bit. So here, I would just have to say, why not Malibu? Well, it's kind of missing Malibu. It's hard to get the gist of Malibu out of that plan because it's only living in the Coastal Act. So it does not serve as a land use element. And so from there, we need to do more than what they've done. It's also walls of text. It's 130 pages, and every page looks like that. There are 4 maps there in the back. So it's tough. It's not really an accessible document to others than the kind of people that are in the room now who like this kind of stuff. Yeah, here's what it looks like. We'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. That said, it's important as a reference. So we'll keep that in mind, but the parts that we think are most applicable and helpful to us. All right, we were going to talk about community input themes and what's happening with the community input, because it's taken us a while to put that together. Community input basically addressed everything in the first public draft documents. It was soup to nuts, and that's absolutely fabulous. What that meant to us is that folks are interested in everything, so it's a joy, they care, and we can work with that. At this point, we've logged, I think, over 800 comments. This is not a shocking number. This happens on comprehensive plan updates. This is taking longer, though, to put together because there's a lot of detail in some of them. We're trying to parse them apart. We are devoted to the cause of fully documenting the community input, and we want to put it in a highly useful format. So the goal right now, and I'm been told over and over again by my fabulous boss over there that we don't want to overcommit, but our goal is to put it into a user-friendly database. And we'll talk more about that when we are done with it. We actually have some consultant help with that because it's bigger than we can handle in-house. These were some of the key topic areas that came up over and over and over again: circulation in every form, connectivity, multimodal, congestion concerns, open space, protect it, we want more of it. Agriculture, we want long-term viability of the local in-town agriculture. Development should be infill, it should be appropriately scaled, and it should support an incredible array of housing diversity that is affordable and innovative in low-impact development. Many comments on what housing and infill should be. The ESHA map is not good enough. Please do a better job with that. And noise and lighting really matter as well to our quality of life, and they aren't addressed as much as we would like. So, also, the community input beyond the themes of the actual content, we got a lot of input on the document structure, and I'm spend a few minutes on that because we've got our Malibu example as well to kind of provide some contrast of what the intention was, so you can think about that. First of all, the document structure itself is quite a bit different than the 1993 LUP. The 93 document has 10 sections. They have, they're each broken up to have a policy background piece followed by the policies, and it's pretty choppy, but it is a format that I have I learned to really appreciate, and so some of the feedback was we want your discussions and your policies a little closer together. Maybe not broken up quite as much as the 93 document, but make it a little easier to navigate. And coastal resources cannot be one chunk. That includes habitat, historic resources, scenic visual resources, et cetera, et cetera. It's just too much. So we're looking at splitting that into 2 or 3 pieces. And I think the feedback was great. We're really comfortable doing that, although we still have an intention of what we really wanted to make one book, and that is the local coastal land use plan as your land use element, with the rest of your general plan elements to follow, where we reduce policy redundancy. The other thing was trying to lift the level of the policy detail so that it didn't overlap as much with the implementation zoning. When staff is writing reports to show that we're compatible with the LCP and they're having to cite a policy that's exactly the same or very close to it as the code in the zoning, it's not serving really anything better than having it structured in a little bit of a different hierarchy. So it's about planning practice and frankly what is accessible and usable for your residents, in addition to those of us in the room. Now we're going to spend a moment about shall language. That was another topic, and what folks noticed in the draft policies of the new document when they compared them to the old ones is there were some policies that included the word shall and the revised policies did not. And let me share with you, we weren't trying to get away from the force of the policy. So this is what the intent was. And we'll use Malibu because we're not on the agenda tonight to talk about RLCLUP content other than at this high level. So we're going to go ahead and borrow this. Don't worry, we'll zoom in. This is that same page, the wall of text, the 130 pages. This is the first 2 pages of the land use policies in the Malibu plan, and I put a box just around one that I thought was sort of interesting. And I'm going to read the whole thing because I think it's important to, and it has shall language, so it's a great example for us. This is policy 2.7. Public access ways and trails to the shoreline and public parklands shall be a permitted use in all land use and zoning designations. Where there is an existing but unaccepted and or unopened public access offered to dedicate easement or deed restriction for lateral, vertical, or trail access or related support facilities, e.g. parking, construction, or necessary access improvements shall be permitted to be constructed, opened, and operated for its intended public use. Breathe. Okay, it's good stuff. The blue and the red we added that, and we'll show you why. So this is sort of what we would suggest as a fresh approach. Plain English, which is strongly recommended in governmental documents. And by the way, I did this rather quickly. Let me back up a minute here. This policy actually addresses 2 topics. The first is a classic. It's about implementing that will go right straight up into the zoning ordinance. That's a really typical step from your policy document to your zoning. The second has a heck of a lot more details. It could be clearer, and it's hard to tease those things apart. So I did this quickly, but nonetheless, I think it serves up our key points. It seemed to me that was 2 different things, and so I suggested 2 policies. Notice the headings. The headings aren't policy, but they at least help you find it. Notice the action words at the beginning, the construct of the sentences. The language is really simple. Notice what happened to shall. So shall is gone. So shall, let's decide that shall means thou shalt, okay, as severe as it can be. In this revision, the words permit, open, and operate, they mean thou shalt permit, open, and operate because they're assumed to be thus. Now, perhaps we need to work shall back in. Maybe this doesn't feel strong enough, but we'd like your feedback, and also we would talk to our city attorney and also with Coastal Commission staff to see if they could have a level of comfort with a different style of how this is done. We see this as being much more accessible. Note the blue on this little, we have bullet points, and you can just see very quickly these different kinds of access. This sentence was hard to read. This is really easy to see. Obviously, you have to read the whole thing doing your work. This isn't getting around the heavy lifting of it, but we do think it could be a useful approach. So that is why we did what we did in the first public draft local coastal land use plan. And so when you look at it and you start to dig into it and you notice how different it is from the 1993 document, which I've heard many people refer to as the devil you know, we get that, and maybe it doesn't need to be so devilish to work through. I will be really frank with you. The first time I cracked that thing open, I found it to be impenetrable. It was so challenging because it's just a wall of, it's 200 pages of this kind of text, so it's tough. Okay. Enough of that. GPAC consensus. So this is the other thing. We need to very carefully relate to you when this moves your way. where the GPAC status was. And generally, the GPAC didn't make a lot of votes. They made a lot of comments, and they heard extensive community comment and provided guidance around that. And we tried to capture that to the best of our ability. And that's what you're going to see in this comment summary. When there was, so our take was, if the GPAC wasn't arguing about something that a GPAC member submitted, if there really wasn't a lot of discussion about it, that was direction that had a reasonable amount of support, because there was no question that if the GPAC members were not all on the same page, they made a note of it and spent some time discussing it. These 5 things had real consensus votes, and so you will certainly see these revisions in the draft document. They relate to, 3 of them are about circulation, the character of Highway 1, a bike ped facility on the east side of Highway 1 immediately adjacent to the highway. We had consensus with dissent about a route further east, and part of the consensus was, this is such a challenging topic, we think the Planning Commission should actually have to grind their teeth a little bit over it. So we'll present it that way, because that's how it landed through the GPAC process.
So, excuse me, I'm sorry, Jill, but
Yep.
the route further east, was this more the inland, inland
Yep.
from Highway 1?
Yep, you got it. And I think that was like the last or the second to the last session. Yeah, okay. Consensus on providing a new land use designation, open space for conservation, and also figuring out how to deal with city parks. There's a designation in your 93 document that could cover that, but it's not applied anywhere on your map, so we can find a way to deal with that. So this is follow-up now, focusing on building up to what we're going to propose as a work plan for you, following up on your retreat and where we left it and the assumptions that we made in assembling this work plan. At the retreat, we felt that you agreed that we would really reserve the second meeting of the month for local coastal land use plan. Although we are also suggesting that if there's openings, we will try to be ready to make use of your time. So for example, June 13th, we don't have any projects ready. So I'm trying to get that community comment summary ready for you so we can make use of the June 13th meeting to the best of our ability. And again, this is that flexibility thing. If this doesn't work, we will discuss that and deal with something else. I don't see the load of applications, private development applications, in conflict with this right now. I think we can work through it at least for the next 3 to 6 months. Okay, then we talked about, should we do this one topic at a time? Should we group some things together? How are we going to do this? We think the only way to do this is topic by topic and admit that we're going to have some iteration because the topics relate to each other. They affect each other. So this led us to propose work plan, and the clearest I forgot to add the dates. Sorry, John. We again noted we're trying, it's tentative for our community comment summary on June 13th, and I think we could have a very useful meeting with that. We are queuing up I think a really rich meeting on June 27th on coastal access as it's your main course. It's going to have a generous side dish of circulation element because it's impossible for me at least, to pull those apart. Yes, we're prioritizing the local coastal land use plan, but we need to think about that other context. We intend to invite the newly formed BPAC to this session. They will have met once. Their first meeting is Thursday, so this is an opportunity for them to hear you discuss transportation at a policy level as they embark on their work on the more strategic document of the Bike and Pedestrian Master Plan. For that meeting, we will need to provide the strike-through underlined section of coastal access and recreation. If I can only get through coastal access, you will hopefully be okay with that. And we will suggest the readings out of the guidance document and anything else that occurs to us that we think will be helpful, or if something occurs to you that you want us to share with your fellow commissioners, please tell me, and then we can communicate that. Now, we think we can be ready to discuss visual and cultural resources at your July session. Coastal Rec at the end of August. That one, actually, the timing on that is intentional there because the Parks Master Plan process is also going on, and they should have some, we're kind of going backwards and forwards in the level of hierarchy of policy to implementation. That said, the work they're doing is informative to you, and so we'd like to take advantage of that while you're thinking about policy level. We see the fall as being rich in land use discussions. So breaking up land use, and in our first draft, we put land use, it includes the topic of land use, all the land use designations, which, by the way, in the Malibu plan, the land use designations, I think they come up on about page 116, which seems late to me. The land use designations in the 93 document are in an appendix in the Half Moon Bay document, which seems really, I don't know. It's just, it's a format that I'm not accustomed to, but that's where they are. So we, when we restructured this in your draft, land use puts them right up front, and there isn't a separate section on development. That's all together. And so we would suggest keeping that all together because that's how land use plans are usually implemented. We think it's really helpful. These three topic areas have risen to the top from community input, GPAC input, and frankly, City Council direction. City Council did direct for discussion of the PUDs with the Planning Commission. So we will be doing that. And Urban Reserve and Ag is also key. We've been contacted by Urban Reserve property owners who would like to come and present the realities of their land use experiences. So I think we can give them enough time to do that. The other reason why we're looking at putting that into the fall is because we are queuing up the better ESHA mapping, and we'd like to have it at least in a draft format to inform our discussion of land use. And I really don't want to do that absent that better information. So if we're able to produce that in that fashion, this lays out well, in our opinion. We could imagine needing to queue up 2 meetings a month to cover this over those 3 months. I'm not sure that we can do each of these in one meeting. So food for thought, think about that. Hazards also will benefit from having the ESHA map done. Obviously, environmental resources will. We also see that as probably a two meeting item. And then public works, we put it last very intentionally because if we can settle on land use, then we can model things that we need to model for public works. So your sewer and water supply, sewer capacity, and components of transportation. So there's some intent there. It might not be the perfect rollout, but that's what we think we can manage. So this is where we need to share the kind of the sobering truth of what this is going to be like. Each session, we would anticipate you're going to have 50 to 100 pages of reading and research. We expect there will be more than the 9 sessions that were listed there. And your folks who are trying to support your effort, we can produce 1 to 2 a month max. We can be prepared for that. 1 is more reasonable. 2 for land use, I think we can do that if we can do that as a whole. So that's sort of our limitations on what we think we can do. And we are considering the kinds of support we can have from specialty consultants, from additional planning kinds of folks. So this isn't just John and Bridget and Jill trying to get this whole thing done by ourselves. We have other people, and we're going to be working on that. But to make the best use of however many meetings we end up having, we're really going to need everybody ready to go, everyone ready in the room, because also we would expect 30 to maybe 45 minutes of community input as part of your session. We've been brainstorming, should we make these, early start and we give you dinner? What can we do, because we think they're going to go to 10. Everybody, I don't know about you, I'm done at 10. And I think we make our best discussions a little bit earlier, so we've talked about that. We'd love your feedback on that. So that's what it's looking like, and I'm almost done. Back to the approach, or I guess coming to the approach. So that leads us to this. This was a slide that you had at your retreat as well. It seemed to us that this was left a little bit open-ended, but we've moved into kind of this step-by-step, topic-by-topic with the full commission. And that's what we've laid out. We actually struck through the divide and conquer. It is not going to work for us because we can't get everything done up front and then divvy it out. So we got rid of that one. The approach that we did, or the work plan concept that you saw back here, this works with full commission, and it could also work with the subcommittee if you still wanted to think about having one that would be working in between the sessions. And that's a presentation of your draft work plan, some thoughts on approach. We did not expect a lot of public comment tonight because we're really not covering new topics. We will broadly notice all the rest of your meetings because they will be content-based and not just about process. We also are just looking forward to hearing your thoughts on this work plan. So just let us know what kind of slides you want, and looks like John has a couple things to say. Thanks.
Just a couple minutes, if I could, and then we'd love to get your talk and consideration on this. First, Jill came on to our staff as your general plan project manager at a 50% plus working time. We have yet to be able to fill that position. So Jill is performing both the duties of the planning and development services manager as well as trying to manage and maintain this work with the general plan. So that can't continue, in all honesty, and and we're working toward that. I wanted you to be aware that our proposal and recommendation to the city council and the city manager has conferred that is to hire a full-time position which would cover general plan related issues, cannabis issues, and affordable housing. Basically take on an advanced planning responsibilities that we really never had or haven't had in-house in many, many, many years, and at a senior planner level. So someone at a high enough level that can take this on. So we, we'll see what happens with the council, and certainly if you wish to voice privately or publicly your support of that, you're welcome to do so. I'm not advocating for it. I think it'll happen, but it's always good to know where you guys stand and the community stands on that issue. But we think it's critically important. Jill can't continue to do double and triple duty out here and bring this to life down through this pathway. She'll be very involved. I'll remain involved in this, but we really need to have that other involvement. So that's a critical piece to this I wanted you to be aware of, and also understand that when we're putting this out, this is really putting some major stress on everybody going with that. And so this is a very aggressive schedule, very, very out there, and I commend Jill. But it also is sort of a challenge. And again, as we have mentioned and said, is that this really will take your full commitment as commissioners. It will take full commitment from the community to weigh in and be prepared. And it'll take us coming back and being prepared for this. So it's going to take a partnership among all of us to make this happen, and make a worthwhile and fruitful process, and as well as, I think, result in a product that will be supported and readily supported by the Coastal Commission. I mentioned in an earlier message that, yes, we have received a letter from Diet and Bhatia indicating that they would be happy to step aside if that was our choice and decision to do so. The council will ultimately make that decision, but clearly we have been working on and developing a plan and program based on the City Council's redirection of the LCLUP and the refocus of that around the idea of potentially working without that master sort of consultant. But that again is going to take, as Jill said, more effort, more issues, because we're going to have individual contractors that we're managing and trying to deal with on that, rather than sort of the primary who has sub-consultants that are out there. So rather than us being able to point to one individual firm or one individual project manager, we will have to manage those. So I just want to, as you're thinking through and as you're working through your, this work program and considering these, just to put out there that, that we have some internal challenges, and we're going to do everything we can to not allow those to become external issues for you. But they are a reality to our working and undertaking this effort. So we're doing what we can, and we'll continue to do so. And Jill is absolutely fully committed, and as I am as well. But it's a challenge. Thank you.
Thank you, John. Thank you for the presentation and managing expectations. So with that, happy to open up public comments if there's any members of the public who wish to speak. Seeing none, we will close that and bring it back to council or commission. And any questions or comments for staff? Commissioner DeMond.
My question here, and I'm not sure that we can answer it at this time, basically is process. Because so that, for example, over here we're saying that we will review the coastal access portion of the LCLUP on the 27th. I guess my question to you is, as a commission, what is our job? What would be the suggested recommendation, for example, that we will be considering at that time?
So I think there's a lot of pieces to that, and I hope other commissioners' comments will flesh that out. But from my perspective, and what staff would love is reviewing the actual red line document, and if you find policies that are going in the wrong direction, it doesn't make sense, some big thing, we would like that vetted in the public forum. If you find little things here and there, and you will, you can provide that to staff directly, and we can report out about that. But it's really trying to make sure that every policy that has perhaps a shade of maybe it's not quite going all the way there, and you feel the language is not right, we want that to be discussed. And we'd love to know what those items are a few days in advance so we can queue it up in particular. So that's why we're going to try to provide sort of the assignments 2 to 3 weeks ahead to the best of our ability. We can, for example, do that right now for the guidance document. We can send you something tomorrow on what to prep for, and then we'll bring you the rest of it. So that's what we're hoping for. Of course, you're also going to hear public comment, and if public comment informs your opinion, if you have something that comes through that you want to vet with your fellow commissioners, we'd hope you'd have a discussion about that.
So amplifying that, basically we'll get a document with words, okay, that in effect cover this. We'll have an opportunity to, among ourselves, make sure that there are no conflicts, or if there are, we'll also hear from the public at that time to see what conflicts they see. But at the end of the session, basically, there's a vote that with the following changes, we agree to this language in this section of the document. Is that what I'm...
We would love to get that far with each session. I would expect you to conclude the session with a list of things that you want us to adjust. I think that you will want to suspend your acceptance of the status of it until you've seen it the way you've directed it to be seen.
Okay, so that the next meeting, for example, after this one, there'll be rewritten language that we'll then see, that we'll have an opportunity either to modify again. If
We're going to have to figure out how we work that
okay,
in.
Again, I'm just thinking about process. So.
Yep. I'm not all the way through it. Okay. Okay.
Commissioner Benjamin?
Thank you. So I'd like to respond to Les's comments, because that's a fair question. What is our work product through this process? So I've done this a couple of times over the years. In the final analysis, we're supposed to recommend a draft local coastal program for the city council to refer for certification after whatever changes they want to make. As Jill indicated, there's a lot of topics and there's a lot of interaction between the topics. So when she said there's an iterative component to this, she didn't understate it. This cannot succeed as a waterfall model. We can't check the coastal access box until we finish checking the environmental resources box, because what looks like a great coastal access plan might blow up when we recognize some overlooked coastal resources, for example. So it's going to be difficult for us to accept any of it until we're ready to accept all of it. That doesn't mean that we shouldn't be nibbling and fixing it. Think of it the way you would negotiate a contract. Nothing is agreed till everything is agreed. I think that's a model for at least from my perspective, on how this can work. Otherwise, we're at risk of chasing our tail. The Coastal Act has two pillars: maximizing coastal access and protection of coastal resources. That's the fundamental constitutional responsibility that the Coastal Initiative and the subsequent Coastal Act imposed on those of us who are responsible for regulating. And I understand the complexity of the environmental resources question, and I know that we need a lot of input to get there. the fact that it has a significant impact on how we interpret everything before that makes it a little bit scary to see that late in the game. I have watched more than a few processes that would pursue a project that for a certain constituent looked like a really good idea, and a blind eye was turned to cost or environmental resources or the CEQA document and the impacts associated with it or some other topic. And after 2 years of work on some project, these issues would finally come to the fore. And the political process was, the community has worked so hard on this for so long, we can't we cannot change all of that work in the past. So it worries me to see the hazards and the environmental resources section laid in the model. That doesn't mean that they don't need a lot of work. To me, that suggests the importance of doing what you asked us to do, which is do some very heavy lifting and surfacing those issues that we know about now, so that we can preload them into the conversation about coastal access or visual resources or recreation or land use early, rather than turning a blind eye to them later. To me, that speaks to a valuable subcommittee kind of approach. It suggests one way or another, whether it's a formal subcommittee or an ad hoc subcommittee or just individuals who pick it up and bring it in and say, you got to know about this because it's going to mess up this other plan that looks like a really good idea. We have to find a way to get that in early, or we're going to increase the work. We're going to end up having to go back and forth, and that is probably my biggest concern.
So if I can just kind of just follow up on that. So I think what I hear Commissioner Benjamin saying is that we're kind of, right now we're looking at opportunities first and constraints later. Is there,
That is what this list looks like. The intention, however, I'll go back to it, was we're queuing up this environmental work right now to have it prepared for, in particular, land use and hazards. So I hear what you're saying. So what we'll do, we'll go back and see if perhaps the consultant can move a little faster than we thought, and maybe we can switch environmental resources with rec. Would that?
It could
Yeah.
be. I mean, I didn't.
Okay.
I'm sorry, through the chair. I didn't mean to suggest that this was the wrong time to be sure that we've considered environmental resources. It's just that I don't know how we can wait that long to do it, in addition. So my hope, or at least my suggestion in terms of our ability to go forward, is to find a way to make sure that for the known environmental resources, or let's say strongly suspected environmental resources, that could impact ideas on, for example, coastal access, or cultural resources, or land use, that we find a way to front load those concepts rather than letting them get on the track and build up a certain momentum that suggests a greater degree of certainty about their feasibility with respect to resources. Does that make more sense? Am I getting across better?
it's clear to me. I think staff understands it as well. John?
I think that the first meeting that we're suggesting, which is the overview of the 800 plus comments, is a great place to start. And I think what's incumbent upon us is to try to draw some themes and to summarize those themes. And probably this is best, and the reason why that's there is to start to ferret out where the community was, where the GPAC was, and to then affirm whether you are aligned with those concerns, issues, or whether, in fact, you think that they were going the wrong direction, or whether, in fact, we missed something, more importantly. I think But I think out of 800, 900 comments or whatever, I'm pretty convinced that not much has been missed. However, the fine-grained detail is not there yet. But I do think that this schedule of the 13th is important. I'm hoping we can make it and make it a meaningful experience. Otherwise, I'm going to suggest that we push. I think we still do the June 27th meeting because I think we have a number of parties, but we may have to push this again out to July to talk about the comment summary and really start to define what you believe are the overarching goals and objectives, first of all, to make sure that we're in alignment, that you're in alignment with what the original goals and objectives of this plan were. I mean, I think we're going to have to go back to some basic building steps and foundational work just to confirm and make sure we're all there. And then obviously then that builds upon the comments and the issues that come about. So I think those are very important, and why Jill and staff was at this point saying, let's come back the 13th, let's talk about these issues. And I think much of this will take care of itself in terms of really ferreting out the major policy issues, not the answers to those policies issues, but that some agreement on those issues.
So, thank you. From my perspective, the comments that I for the record, I sat on the GPAC for the last year. There was, I was an active participant as a member of the public for some of the period before I was a member of the GPAC. The kinds of comments that the GPAC received from the public and that they provided are in some ways kind of orthogonal to the stuff that is in the Coastal Commission's land use planning document. This is a pretty wonky document even for me. And the GPAC strong suit isn't wonkiness, right? So they're going to give you broad feelings like, we like farmland, we like open space, we don't like traffic. And I don't think we're at risk of missing much of that in those 800 comments or the 300 digest. But I think our heavy lifting problem as members of the commission is grasping that, but at the same time becoming expert in this stuff and all of the linked documents that are cited in this stuff. My concern is that as we go through that process, I can't overemphasize the level of investment that it's going to take for us to all get good at this. And from my perspective, we can do that, but we really have to lift. And we aren't going to be able to have that perspective during some of the early meetings. We have to start somewhere. You eat an elephant. It's a terrible environmental metaphor, right? But you eat an elephant one bite at a time. Yes, right. And so I understand that we have to start somewhere. I am not suggesting that we get into analysis paralysis about how we attack this. We can't walk around the mountain indefinitely. But I do think that we have to find a way to season those early conversations with the topics that come up later and be prepared to revise those early topics with the insights that we have now or we think we are likely to have later, and make sure that the risk of those things blowing up the principles in those earlier versions is managed. That's what I'm trying to do.
John?
So I guess the question sort of begs itself, which is, we're updating the 93 plan, I guess principally we believe because it's a little antiquated, it's a little out of date from where we are, right? And the Coastal Commission and other jurisdictions have sort of nuanced that and moved it forward in a more modern way. The big question, I think, in the room is, you know, how many of the what percentage of the policies are really out of whack from the 93, or are we just carrying forward those and perhaps reformatting them into a way that makes it a little easier for all of us to understand? And I think that's a big question that we're not going to answer tonight, but I think that's a big issue. And you know, we have proceeded along a path, I think, to develop the draft plan, which was that it wasn't about the fact that we were throwing out the entire LCLUP. It was that we were just bringing it up to a more readable style, a more legible and understandable pathway, and then also hitting on some of the areas in which we know have been problematic and stumbling areas. Riparian setbacks versus wetland setbacks versus the definition of ponds, waterways, all of those things. That fine-grained detail, because we're tired of that fight as well, frankly, as staff. It just doesn't get us anywhere. Legal staff is a bit frustrated by it. So we know that those are some issues, and that's the detail, I think, some of the detail that we're talking about, and maybe in code, maybe, you know, because we just can't express any of us about exactly where we stand. But I think sort of in the broader perspective is that, you know, is that we need to sort of know at some point is, you know, are we tossing everything out from the 93 plan and starting over, which is a different stretch and a different take on that, or are we really building from a majority or a vast majority of what has already been built in 93? And I think no one's suggesting that we throw it all out.
I think we may be in violent agreement about this.
Okay. But that, from a commission, I mean, and from a staff and commission perspective, that's a big place to start, because what we're bringing to you is a plan that reflects mostly what's already in the 93 plan, just reformatted. And we've taken a whack at some of those important issues. And you'll have to tell us, and the community will have to tell us whether, in fact, those go forward or need to be rewritten and revised. And I think we would have to absolutely agree with you. The GPAC is a great process, is a great group of people, but this is the time and place to start getting to the fine grain, you know, nitty gritty of what we're really trying to achieve and what the policies are saying, and that's really what we're talking about at this point. So I'll sit down. I won't get up again.
Very good. Commissioner Evans, you have any comments?
Did we lose Rick? So first, I need to say that your ability to, for me, the graphics you present and the way you organize the information is way easier for me to read and understand, and I really appreciate that. It's daunting for me personally to look just at a page of text. You know, I'm not so good at that, and I just very much appreciate how you've been organizing the information. I also feel as a designer, I'm accidentally got on the wrong bus. I'm on the lawyer bus instead of the designer bus. And I'm afraid going forward that, as I understand it, so let's say on the unlikely event that some idea comes up that in one of these sections we're looking at that hasn't been suggested yet. Very unlikely that would happen. But if it does, there's a mechanism for that to get merged into our discussions. And somehow, whatever these ideas are, that it gets blended in, and that we can rely on the staff and our legal consultants to do the technical verbiage. I'm petrified to the idea that me personally would be making any kind of judgment of appropriate legal language. It's not a good use of my time, which is important to me. Maybe not important to anybody else, but and so that's of real interest to me, that we're helping think and helping translate. But you know, at least I'm not a lawyer, so I'm not, and I'm not. I don't intend to become a technical expert on how to write code language or policy language. I really have to rely on our staff, and assuming you're going to be available and do most of that for us. And that my job is to understand it. Am I right about that? So I'll weigh in right away that I see no reason why we wouldn't update the code we already have and have a way to flag if there's problems, not just some sort of description of the problems, but a visual representation of what that problem actually is, like you're going to do with the sea level rise. That's a very good example of, lots of us don't necessarily understand the written language as much as the pictorial representation of something. So I'm also making that.
Yeah, through the chair, and I agree with a lot of what Commissioner Evans has to say, but I'm looking to staff to really help us and the audience focus on policy rather than code. I mean, the zoning code will follow to put, cross the I's and T's about what this, so I'm sure everybody has their own pet peeve about what this number should be in terms of feet, lanes, and so on. But my fear is that, every meeting we're going to have a group of people saying, I want this detail in here, whether we're talking, even though we're talking about policy, they want detail. And I think it's imperative on the planning staff to help both us and the audience really just focus, at least at this point, on policy. I mean, we'll get a bite of the apple, I presume, sometime down the road when it comes to codifying, these into rules and so on. So, I mean, to me, it's a problem to me sometimes mentally, what's policy and what's code, because I'd like to see them in the same paragraph as opposed to separately. So I think, at least from my vantage point, I think I would behoove you to really help us on a continual basis to focus on policy, not on details and code.
We just want to note a couple things at this point. Of course, we are here for you. That's our intention. The city attorney is going to be all over this thing. So, admittedly, we may have come up with a few wonderful, fabulous things in this room and get some feedback that we need to make adjustments, and that will happen too. So I don't want to represent that your final word is going to be exactly and precisely what the council sees. To the best of our abilities it will be, but we will have that legal review, and it will be done not by the planners in the room, but folks like this who can do that. So just want to reassure commissioners who are concerned about that. And yes, maintaining the dialogue at a policy level while we're working on a plan is a perpetual challenge with planning, because folks want to go to the details. In fact, a lot of our community input is at a much higher level of detail than we would put in policy. What we have done with that is generalize it sometimes. If somebody's really concerned about one particular intersection or walkway or something, we look at that and say, well, gee, that's a great comment on this particular item. And in fact, it informs us about 5 or 6 other places where this might be relevant. So bringing it up to the policy level. So I hope that's helpful, but it's something that does need to be kind of readdressed with each meeting, because we will get too detailed. And you don't need 2 zoning ordinances. I'm really concerned about that. This needs to be your policy document.
With that, Commissioner Hernandez.
He has a couple of comments. So number 1, I fully support city hiring more resources to support the planning process. The Planning Commission will really need to rely on staff to move to move the ball forward from month after month. I would support a more aggressive staff modeling so that we can complete our work with a high degree of quality with the schedule we have. I would ask my fellow commissioners their opinion on this matter and whether we should make a formal recommendation to the council. He has one more comment. With that, I don't know if you
Well,
wanna
we can
discuss
go ahead
that.
and open it up for
Discussion.
comment on that. Commissioner Hernandez's suggestion that we request council provide additional resources for this effort. Am I gaining the gist of that? Commissioner Hernandez requested maybe if you could repeat his tweet or his text.
Yes, he's fully in support of the city hiring more resources in the planning process. He understands that the planning commission was really going to.
Hey, Rick, are you able
you
to
there?
speak?
Are you there, Rick? No, it's on. His cell phone may be muted, and there's a bit of a delay in the video.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you very well. Yeah, we can hear you. There's just a bit of a delay. That's part of it.
So, my point was that, there's too much feedback on my phone, so it's really hard for me to ask questions or respond in a meaningful way. But my request to the staff is to just
I think we're going to cut off Commissioner Hernandez there. We're got a lack of connection there, but yeah, Rick has suggested that we request City Council consider additional staff resources on this. So I guess I would just open that up for just general question, and then maybe just putting it out there, I would like to hear back from staff on that.
Through the chair. So I think that it's a great idea to have incremental resources for this. I will say that there's a notion in the software industry. There's a famous book called The Mythical Man Month, and one of its premises is that adding manpower to a late project makes it later. And the reason is because of the additional startup costs for bringing in new staff. The key here is that John and Bridget and Jill have great organizational memory that we will pay a price to transfer to new staff. And to the extent that we can staff our way to extract the benefit of their understanding in the course of our work, as opposed to an inefficient transfer, an incomplete transfer to someone else who we then try to get work from, we can reduce that risk.
Yeah, agreed. Yes.
I would say that if the staff, well, first of all, I don't think it's our business to make a decision about who hires who. And secondly, if the staff doing this report says they need more help, then as a commissioner, I'm saying, whatever you feel you need, I think it's great, but it's not our decision. That's my own view on that.
Commissioner DeMona, anything additional you want to add? Okay, so I would just, I just reiterate, we heard from John that an effort's already going on to bring on additional support to sort of backfill Jill and her double duty. So, yeah, I guess if additional resources are needed, we can bring that back and consider that at that time. But now may not be the time to necessarily bring that up. So Bridget, did Commissioner Hernandez have additional?
Okay, so with respect to the policies, let's see, with respect to policies, we need clear, well-written language that uses shall versus other soft language. Shall has a legal value that provides clarity in situations where there is ambiguity. Agreed that current policies are hard to read, for the public to read, sorry. And that it needs to be improved. He agrees it needs to be improved. So that's what he has.
Okay. Suggest maybe we not read the LCUP on a cell phone or through.
Yeah, that's a little long. Agreed.
So I want to compliment staff and, everybody on this effort. I know it's been a long time coming, and I think you probably all realize that, well, I'm sure at many times through this process it's felt like it's just too hard. But I'm sure you all realize that if we're able to have a readable local coastal land use plan for Half Moon Bay that generally has the community support, would be a monumental success, and certainly a model for coastal communities throughout California and really everywhere. So hopefully we can get there. My sort of thinking of this is, we're looking at the local coastal land use plan, and that's really, the kind of policy document, and then we've got the general plan that provides a much broader sort of vision and sort of the community constitution. And then we have CEQA, that's really the state environmental review process that kind of dives in there. So we're kind of, I don't want to say at the beginning of this process, but there's certainly lots of stages here that we're going to have to be looking at and doing a number of different things. So I don't know if you have any comments on just how the LUP fits in with the general plan and CEQA, and kind of how we should be making sure that we're I guess compartmentalizing our thoughts, or making sure that we're focused on the right, we're looking at the right document with the right lens.
With Council's revised direction to bring the LCLUP ahead, it does change the relationship of how we're going to approach the environmental review. The LCLUP does not require a CEQA document, but it does require technical studies. So we are prepared to develop those technical studies within the bounds of recommendations from Coastal Commission staff. We're having dialogue with them, and to have them be also sufficient for future CEQA use. The good thing about sequencing this way is we know what's in the first public draft general plan elements, and I know a lot of folks have made public comments to you about concerns of conflicts between the LCLUP and the general plan elements. But frankly, they were put out in the first draft, and I think they have probably a few, but not a lot of conflict. And if we pin down the LCLUP, we will know where it hits those elements. And the elements will come next, because we're going to finish this LCLUP with its technical studies and get that launched to the Coastal Commission as council directed. And then we can swing back and pick up what we need to do with the general plan elements. And frankly, I think that task is going to be, I think it's easier, frankly. I also, at that point, will know what kind of CEQA coverage the general plan elements need, because they are subject to CEQA review, and we'll leverage what we can from those previous technical studies. If we have to do more, we will then realize that and scope that out. Does that help?
That's helpful, very helpful. Thank you very much. So yeah, I guess, my last comment, just I think, it's important for, it's a marathon and not a sprint, and kind of the continuity of information as we review this. And I guess that's one of the roles I see as the Planning Commission and the General Plan Advisory Committee and others, is just really providing this is, where we started and how we got to here, and making sure that we're helping to bring the community there. So, so thank you for all your good work. So, is there any motion that you need from?
I actually had
Okay.
more comment.
Okay, Commissioner.
So I wanted to speak to my colleagues' comments. I didn't mean to suggest that we should become lawyers, and I certainly didn't mean to suggest that we wanted to supplant staff in the role of providing us with insight. But the work here is fundamentally different from the other kinds of things that we do as a planning commission. In this case, we're trying to state our sense of what our local coastal program policy should be to further the goal of the Coastal Act. That's really different from trying to look at projects and saying we think that's consistent or not. So it's a really different role for us. And our job, I think, is not necessarily to cross every legal T and dot every legal I, but to be sure we've done a good job of saying what we think the city's responsibility is to achieve the purpose, to further the purpose of the Coastal Act. So I hope that clarifies the kind of task I vision, and that it's not as extreme as the paralegal role that you might be thinking I was advocating. With respect to the shall and the, there's a bit of nuance about this. I certainly love a document that's easier to read. I'm all for it. But when you say something shall be a permitted use, that doesn't mean that the permitted use isn't subject to other constraints. For example, you might have a house that's a permitted use, but it still has setback constraints. And if we say in this area a house shall be permitted, you're not saying that it doesn't have to obey these other rules. If we have a language that says you shall permit a house, if we want to do that, let's be sure we don't throw out that baby of the other constraints with the bathwater of the obtuse language.
I just have to. I'm sorry. That obtuse language is going to be in your zoning ordinance. It's okay to have it tiered, we think. So I got your feedback. I'm going to think about it a little bit. Okay. And we will also go look at our structure with and without shall, so we're prepared for you when we bring draft documents. We would like a motion about the work plan. I don't know that we can say that this slide represents exactly what you want, but if you could provide a general motion that we are going to embark as has been discussed tonight, and with any other caveats you want to put in there about your approach, about sequence, about, gosh, I don't know, anything else.
Okay, thank you. With that, would anybody like to make a motion?
I'm trying. So could you, Jill, could you suggest a way that I could frame the concern about front-loading some of that information into the earlier phases, this comment that I tried to bring out a couple of times that will reduce the risk of us having to backtrack on some of the earlier items because of constraints exposed in the later ones?
Right. Well, I think you might have just done it. I do. I think that's fine. It would be nice if you identified in particular that you're interested in the ESHA mapping update or
Yeah,
anything like that. That would be really helpful.
Okay. And also I wonder whether my colleagues have any interest in trying to do some preliminary groundwork for the broader commission through some kind of subcommittee activity. Does that have any appeal, or are we working as a whole?
Let me at least give you my view and other, obviously, the way my mind works, I need to see it all in context. You know, if I haven't read through it and haven't thought about it, I mean, if we're dealing with each subject separately, where we do that, but I think from a contextual standpoint, I'd at least like to have the opportunity. It may be after a few meetings that your idea is the perfect one, but at this point, at least from a contextual standpoint, from my standpoint, I'd like to see the whole baby rather than just an arm and a leg, so to speak, at least for now. That's my view.
I'd like to make a motion that we move forward with the suggested procedure that the staff has for reviewing the LUP and use their judgment, and we refine it as we need going forward.
Would the maker of the motion accept an amendment to suggest what our staff has indicated is their judgment with respect to trying to front-load the known hazards and environmental resources information to avoid costly backtracking in the earlier segments of this schedule?
Got a motion on the table?
Well, it's not seconded. I'm asking. I'm going to second it if that's okay with you.
Yeah, I guess it would, yeah, die for a lack of a second.
I'd like to make a motion, please. Oh, I'm sorry, Les. I move that we adopt the proposed work plan with the proviso that the hazards and environmental resources component information that is available today inform the earlier sections of the work plan so that we can minimize the risk of backtracking as part of the acknowledged need to iterate in order to get these interlocking pieces to fit together, otherwise proceeding with the work plan as proposed.
I would just second an abbreviated motion of that. But yeah, I second that.
You can't, you're chair.
I can, as chair.
I'm second.
See, okay.
I'll second.
These are rules that weren't briefed to me, you know. Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you. Okay, so with that,
Perfect.
and we got an eye from Rick. Okay, very good.
Like an 8-minute, there's like an 8-second delay, so he's watching it too, so.
Okay, so with that, moving on to Planning Commission communications. Any communications to report? Seeing none.
I move to adjourn.
I move that we adjourn or I second that with the notion that we adjourn in memory of the victims of the Manchester bombing.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Thank you all for your patience.